My name is Mike Kraft. I'm a technology advisor here at Corporate Armor, and we partnered with ESET to put together this presentation for you guys on the shift to remote work, and then also what we can do to help you guys, and how ESET can help with that as well. So let's begin. Now, I really don't need to tell you guys about COVID-19 or the impact that it's made on the world. I'm pretty sure all of you are very well aware of what's going on right now. Countries are putting together travel bans, schools are closing, businesses are closing, people can't have gatherings of large groups. A lot of places have either stay-at-home policies or even um, bans on travel. So because of this shift and because of this, I guess, new world that we live in, there's a lot of changes that need to be made, and especially in the workforce. So what we're seeing a huge influx in is the shift to the company or to employees working from home. Now, like large, high-profile companies like Google and Microsoft, they already have plans in place for this. In fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of you saw companies like that were not only asking their employees to work from home, but sometimes even mandating that. And these companies have the infrastructure in place, and they have the policies that are needed for remote work. A lot of their employees are already using laptops and already have the tools that they need. But for many smaller businesses and smaller organizations, the situation is quite different. If they did have a remote workforce, chances are they were primarily accessing email or maybe like non-operational systems that they were using. If you look at the education sector, that's another one where, like universities, for example, already had a lot of plans in place for this. They already have telelearning. They already have remote classrooms and ways for their students to learn even if they're not on campus. But then if you look at, say, elementary schools, high schools, primary education, they didn't have those tools in place. Their education does require the students and the teachers and even the administrative staff to all be on site. Little information to my life. So I have 3 kids. One is in college, one is in elementary school, the other one is in preschool. And my college-age son, he is used to this. I mean, he already takes classes online. He already meets with his teachers online, does assignments online. So this is not really anything different. I mean, yeah, he didn't go to campus anymore, but he still was able to take his classes. I think the only real thing that we had to do was for his first aid class, I had to buy him a first aid kit at home to work with as opposed to using the one in school, but no big deal. Elementary school son, very different, extremely different. He's 9 years old, and their school provided packets to take home where he actually still has to write and has paper and everything. And then they have weekly class meetings, and that is complete chaos. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this or have to deal with this as parents, but a Zoom meeting with over 20 kids, all 9 or 10 years old, trying to talk over each other with just one teacher in there trying to keep the meeting in order it's quite interesting. They even had one where the teacher actually had to, or I guess lost connection or something, but she was gone for a few minutes, and it was just 2 or 3 minutes of 10-year-olds trying to talk over each other and trying to show each other their toys and their pets and everything. So it's just anarchy. But anyway, back to the point is, like I said, there are some companies, some school systems, organizations that were already prepared for this, but most were not prepared to have a complete work from home environment. So just some, I guess, necessities in order to be able to work from home successfully. Obviously, you need a computer. That's pretty much a given, or also internet is something else that you would need. A dedicated workspace is highly recommended. If you don't have the ability to have a dedicated workspace, I understand, but if you can set aside at least a room or a space within a room in your house to have that dedicated workspace is something that would be extremely helpful when you are trying to do your job if you're no longer in the office. A phone obviously is required if you need to be able to communicate with others outside of, say, email or through a chat. Multiple ways you can set up a phone. Obviously, there's the actual physical phone, you have VoIP phones, soft phones, you have cell phones. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get employees set up along the lines of that. Now, the discipline and strict routine, those are up to the employee. Being able to keep their same schedule that they do when they're in the office, or keep the same discipline that they would if they were in the office. We actually have a great video on our YouTube channel about working from home and how employees can really, I guess, make the best of it. But because of this influx of working from home and a lot more people out there that are no longer behind the corporate network firewall, cyber criminals are having a field day. I mean, if there's one thing that we know about cyber criminals, is that they do not hesitate to jump on opportunities. And now with this influx of home-based devices that are connecting to corporate resources without that corporate-grade security, it's an open playing field for them. And they are going to be rushing to exploit it. For an example here, think about a couple years ago we heard about the Target data breach, and how impactful that was. But the way the cyber criminals were able to breach Target was through their HVAC vendors. I think it was their HVAC, but one of their another third party that worked with Target directly, it was through their system. So they were able to get through the less secure system, and then that gave them access to the to Target's secure system. So on a much smaller scale, it's the same thing for these smaller businesses where their employees might not have the same protections enabled, might not have the same securities enabled on their mobile or mobile device or laptop, or even their home device. And then it's much easier to get in that way, and then they can use that device to get into the corporate environment. So with the mobile workforce and this new norm, it really all boils down to two issues. There is the people problem, and there is a technology problem. So let's take a closer look at both of these and what some of the people problems are that we can deal with, and what some of the technology problems are that we can address as well. So let's start off with the people problem. The first part of the people problem is making sure that their home network is secure, at least somewhat secure. I mean, and really it is out of your control. I mean, their home network is something that they have set up. The devices that connect to it is out of your control. So it's really more about educating them, making sure that employees know that they need to turn off file sharing on the systems that they'll be using to access their work environment. If it is a corporate device, maybe go ahead and take care of that for them ahead of time, or remote in and turn it off. But regardless, making sure that file sharing is not enabled on those home devices is extremely important. Also, make sure that their home router or their access points has some type of security, preferably like a WPA2 security that's enabled, where they have to have some type of password or security token to get online. But really instill in them, really remind them to never connect to any type of unsecured or open Wi-Fi access points. I'm a little bit embarrassed by this, but I'll go ahead and tell you guys just a quick story. Years ago, when I worked for another company and I used to travel a lot, I was going to an event, and the company was, they often would wait till last minute to book my hotel. And because of this, I was not able to stay in the hotel where the event was being held. I actually had to stay pretty far away. And the hotel I was staying in, it wasn't the nicest. It's not somewhere I would take my family. And they didn't have secure Wi-Fi. I needed to connect to the internet at one point, and I knew the risks, but I did it anyway. A few days later, I had some I guess purchases show up on my bank statement that I didn't recognize. So I'm not saying for sure that it was the unsecure Wi-Fi, but that's the only thing that I could think of that would really have caused that issue. So it's, that's just me with my personal banking experience, but with the business, it's, you really have to consider what types of damages could be done if one of your employees was just to connect to an unsecure Wi-Fi and then basically open up your network to the world. Now, on top of making sure that they connect to a secure Wi-Fi, you also want to make sure that they have strong passwords. Now, this is something, especially if you've been lax in the past, if everyone's in the office all the time, it's not really as big of a deal. I mean, it still is a big deal. You still want to make sure that you have strong passwords, but really want to make sure that long passwords are required now that they are out and about and in the open. Better yet, a passphrase, even better. Also, you might want to go ahead and put in some policies to make sure that they change their password on a regular basis, that accounts will be locked out after a number of failed attempts. Also, you really want to make sure that employees are not using their same passwords for work as they do for their personal logins. And I mentioned making sure that they get locked out after so many failed attempts. A lot of times, cyber criminals will use tools to try to, I guess, brute force attacks or continually try new passwords and over again until they get the right one. So if they can't get into your corporate environment because you have a really strong password, or if you lock them out after so many attempts, if they can get into their personal account, maybe their personal Amazon or their email, then they can use that same password on your corporate networks. Now they're in. So you really want to make sure that, or at least try to train your employees to make sure that they're not using the same passwords over and over again. Now, whoops, actually, sorry guys. That's okay. Well, I got a little bit out of order with my slides, but anyway, on top of passwords, uh, making sure that you instill the habit of logging out of devices even when at home is also very important. Now, within our company, when we first got started a couple years ago now, we were just a small group of people. There's about 5 of us in a small office space while we're waiting for our office to be completely renovated and open. But when we were all in this small space together, if someone left their computer unlocked, it was fair game. If you went to lunch, you might come back and your desktop background is something completely different than it was whenever you left. And yeah, it's kind of a fun way for us to tease each other, but it was also a way for us to make sure that we are staying secure, really to make sure that we lock our computers every time we step away. So in the office, I got to be really good at that. I made sure I always locked my computer because I didn't want to have a new desktop background, especially if I'm going to be doing a demonstration where you can see my screen like right now. So make sure that employees lock their computers when they step away. I mean, at home, accidents can happen, especially if employees have kids. Imagine a kid trying to go to their favorite website and they don't know any better, so they start clicking on links, and next thing you know, they've accidentally downloaded some ransomware on your work computer. So when you're taking your lunch break, or if employees are taking their lunch break, or if they're done for the day, or anytime they walk away from their device, really want to make sure that they lock their computers before stepping away. If it's possible, make sure that they log out of any company accounts that they might be logged into, or disconnect from the VPN. And then if it's a shared computer, if this is a kind of a BYOD scenario where they're using their personal devices at home and other people have access to those devices, you really want to make sure they have separate user profiles in order to make sure that somebody else in the family doesn't have access to their corporate resources. Okay, so another thing, excuse me, sorry guys, that is extremely important with employees, telling them to change their passwords, or telling them to set strong passwords, or telling them to lock their computers when they step away, and telling them to make sure they're connected to strong Wi-Fi connections. That's one thing, but what's really important is having some type of training in place for the employees, where they have to make sure that they understand all this criteria before going home and taking their work home with them. We're going to come back to the cybersecurity training here in a little bit. I just want to throw it out there that it is extremely important to make sure that there's some type of training in place for employees as they start to transition to working from home. So now that we've talked about the people problem, let's talk about the technology problem. So now let's take a look at some of the different technology issues that users will face as they make that transition to working from home, and how we can address these issues as well. So, I mean, this one really should be a no-brainer by now, but you really can't trust the antivirus that comes shipped on home computers. So if someone is using their personal device to do their job, it really isn't going to cut it. You want to make sure that there is a full-featured solution that guards against all manner of threats with multiple layers of defense. So something that would include personal firewalls, protection from malicious websites, guarding against malware, protecting against portable devices that could be infected. So you really want to make sure that you invest in some type of business class endpoint security that your IT department can administer, can push out to the endpoints, can monitor as well. So something that is, like I said, not just some home solution that came prepackaged with the computer, but a dedicated business class antivirus solution. Another thing that's extremely important, this kind of goes back to the password problem that we had before, is requiring a multi-factor authentication tool. I mean, passwords only go so far, and there's really not much that you can do to keep your employees from using their same passwords over and over again, or from using their pets' names on every account that they own. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but a lot of times on like Facebook, for example, it looks almost like a game where they get these questionnaires that they can fill out. It's like, oh, what high school did you go to? What was your favorite pet's name? Or what was your favorite vacation spot? And it's, oh yeah, these are all fun things about myself that I want to share with the world. But these are tools that hackers can use. They can grab that information and start to type that into your Amazon account or your personal email account and so on. And eventually they're going to get access to those systems. So a two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, 2FA, whatever you want to call it, this is your best line of defense against those cyber crooks that are using the brute force techniques or using stolen credentials or even credentials that they purchased on the dark web. So this way, in order to access your work applications, your VPN, or whatever it is that you need to have employees accessing, make sure that multi-factor authentication is available, make sure it's turned on, and that users are actually utilizing it. All right. Now, if employees will be accessing your internal resources, make sure that on top of that multi-factor authentication, they're also using a VPN. This is really a must because that VPN is going to encrypt your corporate traffic as it traverses the public internet. It's going to make sure that eavesdroppers or hackers cannot access that information that's traveling from their device at home to the internal network. Not only that, but also VPN connections allow your IT team to extend more of your internal network security measures to those remote devices. So if you don't already have a VPN, get a VPN. If you already have a VPN, maybe for those few remote workers that you had previously that would just kind of come and go, but while everyone else in the office, like I said, if you have a VPN, make sure that you have enough licenses and the capacity to cover the now many users that will be off network that will be accessing your internal resources. Now, you also need an added layer of security if employees are going to be downloading any types of corporate files to their personal devices. So you want to make sure that you provide some type of encryption solution, whether it is a full disk encryption or even a file and folder encryption. Especially if you go with the file and folder route, you really want to make sure that employees are keeping their personal files separate from their corporate documents. And then once they have those separated, to make sure that those corporate documents are saved to the encrypted folders. You also want to make sure that, if you have regulations that you have to adhere to, that if they do require encryption, that all employees that have work from home devices have some type of encryption enabled on those devices, so that way you can ensure that you stay compliant with those different regulations, even if you do have employees that are working offsite or working from home. And then I guess the last technology problem really that we'll address today is make sure devices are up to date on their security patches. Security patches, they address vulnerabilities in the software that either cyber criminals or hackers might use to gain access to the device, and then of course once they gain access to the device, then they'll have access to your data. Security patches for operating systems or for your Windows devices, for your iOS devices, for Android devices are crucial. Um, any operating system is vulnerable if they're not up to date on their security patches, and they have far-reaching implications if someone were to get in and use those vulnerabilities. But now, I mean, patches and updates are only one element of your entire cybersecurity strategy, but they are a very crucial component within that strategy. So whether it is just 2 or 3 employees that are working remotely, or you have an entire corporate network worth of devices that are all off-site now, you really want to make sure that you have some type of patch management policy in place in order to make sure that those vulnerabilities are not being used by hackers to access your corporate systems. So it's not all doom and gloom here, guys. I know so far I've gone over all these different ways that people can be vulnerable to attacks or different holes that could be in your systems because of the new influx of remote workers, but it's not all bad. There's actually quite a few tools that are out there that are beneficial that really help out with remote work. Cloud-based productivity suites, online collaboration tools, chat and conferencing tools, remote access technologies. These are all ways that home-based employees can stay productive, actually just as productive as they were in the office, if not more productive. So when they do take their home with them, make sure that you are not only keeping the security side of things taken into account, but also make sure that they have additional tools that they'll need to be able to continue to do their jobs properly. But now with all that being said, especially with the security side of things that we've gone over so far, we want to be able to protect you guys. We want to be able to make sure that those endpoints are protected. We want to make sure that encryption is enabled. We want to make sure that two-factor authentication is available to you guys and that your employees have access to the trainings that they need in order to stay safe online. So let's take a look at the different ways that ESET can help out with what we've talked about so far. So we'll start off with the ESET endpoint solutions. So no matter what size business you have, there are multiple ESET solutions available and different ESET solutions that can fit into different size businesses. When you are using ESET protection, or at least the business grade protection, you do have a centrally managed dashboard which allows you to deploy ESET to endpoints. It allows you to manage ESET once it's been deployed. You can put together your different security policies. You can push out updates. But having a centrally managed business class security is extremely important when you do have users that are no longer all in the office and you still need to be able to control the endpoint protection on those devices. So ESET does make that very easy with their ESET Security Management Center. But beyond just being able to manage the endpoint security, you really want to make sure, you really want to look out for 3 things, kind of a triangle, if you will, whenever you're looking for proper security for your endpoints. The first one is that you want to make sure that there's a high detection rate. I mean, this one's pretty obvious. You want to make sure that that endpoint solution is going to capture as many threats as possible. You also, the second part of the triangle is you want to make sure that there is a low false positive rate. So we don't want the antivirus solution to detect a legitimate program that a business uses to operate and then block users from being able to use that because that's going to block them from doing their jobs. So second part, like I said, is make sure that you have a solution that has a low false positive rate. And the third piece of that triangle is make sure that it has a low footprint. It doesn't use up a lot of system resources. You don't want it to disrupt the users. You want them to continue to do their jobs as they normally would without having that antivirus get in their way. So just to recap, high detection rate, low false positives, and low footprint. Now, I can tell you all day long, and ESET employees can tell you all day long how great their solution is, but do your research. Look it up yourself. There's a lot of great third-party tools that have evaluated tons of different antivirus or endpoint protection solutions. So do your homework, look up any of those third-party tools, and I'm pretty confident you're going to find that ESET is typically one of the top ones with the high detection, one of the bottom ones with the false positives, and also one of the low ones as well when it comes to that small footprint, making sure it's not eating up system resources. Just a couple other things I wanted to point out about the ESET endpoint security as well. ESET has been around for over 30 years now. So they've really had quite some time to craft their solution, but because of this 30 years of experience, they do have machine learning. They have AI that's built in that can detect unknown threats. They have a rather large database of known threats and vulnerabilities that are, of course, protected by ESET as well. On top of the 30 years of experience, they also have offices across the globe. Actually, quite a few of their employees are located in their Central European offices. And that might not sound important, but if you think about where a lot of threats come from, they typically come from Eastern European countries. So by having those offices right there, they can detect those threats pretty much as they happen immediately. And they detect the threat, they stop the threat, they put out a virus definition update, it gets pushed out to your computers, and by the time you start your day or first thing in the morning, you don't even know that that threat ever existed because ESET has already been able to get everything prepared and ready to prevent that from happening on your machine. So let's move on to the next piece of the ESET puzzle that can resolve your work from home needs, ESET Encryption. I mentioned before that there are different ways of encrypting devices, whether it's file and folder or full disk encryption. ESET can do both. And you're going to start to hear me say this more and more. It's going to become a common theme here. But the ESET encryption is also centrally managed. So because it is centrally managed, it makes it easy for the IT staff to push out the encryption to the employees at home, and then also to manage the encryption on their devices. Another great thing about the ESET encryption is that there's no end user interaction. So the local user doesn't have to do anything, and they really shouldn't notice anything. They can keep working on their device. It will encrypt their either the files and folders, or at least create that encrypted folder where they can put their files, or it can do, as I said before, the full disk encryption. For any of you encryption nerds out there, ESET endpoint encryption is FIPS 140-2 validated with 256-bit AES encryption. So it is secure. The encryption supports a whole array of operating systems, and whether it's a brand new Windows 10 device all the way down to a Windows XP, if you still have an XP machine that you're using, you can still use the ESET encryption. Now, obviously, people aren't taking servers home with them, or at least I hope they're not taking servers home with them. But if you still have servers in the office that you want to protect with the encryption, you can do that as well. It goes all the way back to server 2003. Once again, I hope you're not using a 2003 server still, but if you are, you can protect it with ESET encryption services. It also works on iOS devices, and for companies I mentioned earlier, but companies that need to stay compliant, so they need to make sure that their data is encrypted. It helps out with that. And it's very fast to set up. The actual management portion of it takes about 10 minutes to set up. I guess theoretically you could have everything done in an hour after having that management side of things set up and get the devices set up as well. You can have encryption across your devices, like I said, theoretically within an hour. So it's pretty impressive. The third piece of the ESET security puzzle that we're going to put together today is the two-factor authentication. So I mentioned earlier about making sure that passwords were secure and making sure that employees also use two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, whatever you want to call it. ESET does have a centrally managed, here we go, like I said, you hear the theme over and over again, two-factor authentication tool. So once again, IT can make sure that it gets pushed out to employees, that can be managed all from one dashboard so they don't have to touch every device individually. It works on both iOS and Android devices. You can use this to secure on-premise applications, cloud applications like Office 365 or Google Apps, Dropbox, or others really via either ADFS or even a SAML integration. There's also multiple ways that you can use the authentication tool, whether it's through the mobile app or push notifications, hardware tokens, FIDO security keys. You can create your own custom methods as well. It integrates with Active Directory, so if you have an Active Directory environment, it makes it a little bit easier to get it set up and deployed to your employees, but Active Directory is not necessary. So if you're not using Active Directory, no big deal. You can still use the ESET two-factor authentication as and have it centrally managed. And the last piece of the puzzle that we'll put together today is the cybersecurity awareness training that is provided by ESET. So I mentioned training your employees, making sure that they don't fall for hacking attempts, making sure that they don't use the same passwords over and over again, and so on. If you don't feel comfortable with this, or if you would rather utilize someone that is an expert on these items, you can utilize the ESET cybersecurity awareness training. There's two different versions of this. There is a free training and a paid training. With the free training, they get, it's basically like a video that they can watch that goes over how to stay secure and how to prevent attacks. But the paid training does include that same online video series, so they can still watch the same stuff. But then there's also trainings that they can take, and how do I put this? It kind of turns the trainings into games, gamification, I guess you could say. But by doing this, it really engages the employees. It teaches them by playing games. So it just makes it that much easier, and then it sticks with them that much more too, because it helps remember, or helps you remember by doing it that way. There's also, with the paid version, a dashboard that you can use to track the status of the learnings, so you can make sure that employees are engaged and actually are taking the trainings as they should be. There's email reminders that can be sent to employees through the paid version, so that way, if there's, make sure you take this training or make sure you take that training type thing. And once the employees complete their trainings, they get a nice certificate and even a LinkedIn badge, so they can, I guess, show off that they took the cybersecurity awareness training. Now, some of the topics that are included in the trainings include password safety, email safety, phishing, social engineering, two-factor authentication, internet protection, malware education, and I think there's more. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. So a lot of different subjects to combat the cyber criminals by going through the cybersecurity awareness training, and it's affordable too, which is always nice. If the paid version is about $20 per employee, so I mean, $20, and you can make sure that your employees are well aware of the threats that are out there, and make sure that your employees are being vigilant and making sure that they are protecting the corporate data. It's it's a pretty fair price to pay, I would say. So those were the threats that we're facing right now with the shift to working from home, and then how ESET can help prepare your business and prepare your employees to really not only work from home productively, but also securely. Definitely want to thank everyone for joining us today. Greatly appreciate all the questions. Greatly appreciate the feedback as well. Hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. This is the first time that we've done a lunch and learn this way, with everything being remote. We've done lunch and learns in the past where we would meet in certain locations, but obviously we can't meet. I mean, if we could meet, we wouldn't even be having this discussion right now. So I do want to thank everyone for taking part in this, for asking questions, for being attentive, and for taking some time out of your day to learn more about ESET. Thanks again for joining, guys. If you have questions, if you want to learn more, you have the information on the screen, and then we'll also be following up with some additional details. So I will hopefully talk to everyone soon, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I hope everyone stays safe. Bye, guys.